Tonight on Currents News, backlash against the blue. Some are calling for police departments in America to be dismantled or defunded.
In New York City, cops are warning that people will suffer if budgets are slashed, but protesters are arguing that change is necessary to protect lives. I'm Emily Druby with both sides of that story.
And kicked out of a protest, the mayor of Minneapolis is told to go home because he won't back shutting down the city's police force.
Racism is a learned behavior. People are not born racist.
Brooklyn's Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio with a powerful homily against the sin of racism and the power of prayer needed so much right now.
Vigils across the country allowing people to come together in prayer. I'm Jessica Easthope with how Currents News participated in its own vigil to help heal.
Plus, New York City is declaring victory over the coronavirus. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. There are growing calls for drastic action directed against police. In Minneapolis, where George Floyd died at the hands of cops, there's a move to abolish the force entirely. More on that in a moment. We begin in New York, where Mayor Bill de Blasio is vowing to take an axe and cut the NYPD's budget. Currents News' Emily Druby has the story from Williamsburg.
Mayor Bill de Blasio is planning on cutting the NYPD's budget in response to demands from protesters for change.
People did not protest for the sake of protest. They protest to achieve change, and now we must deliver that change.
On Sunday, the mayor talked about moving money from the NYPD and using it for social and youth services.
We are committed to shifting resources to ensure that the focus is on our young people.
Calls to defund or even abolish the police have become top demands among protesters throughout the country, including here in New York City.
When more funding is put into, policing, than it is education, then housing, social services, it's an issue. It shows that there's an imbalance.
The head of the NYPD's detective union, Paul DiGiacomo, is warning that slashing the police budget will have consequences.
If you cut the funding from the New York City Police Department, the only people that will suffer are the people of this city.
The detective is also taking aim at politicians he accuses of not supporting the cops.
It's not fair to the members of the NYPD and my detectives that are out there putting their lives on the line. If you assault one of my detectives, we will go after you with civil litigation. That is a promise. We are done being abused.
Former police officer and current criminal justice professor Peter Moskos adds any funding cut will almost definitely mean less cops.
You can't easily cut an organization that where 80+% of the funding goes to labor costs. So at least we should be honest about what is being proposed.
Some are talking about stripping $1 billion out of the NYPD's $6 billion budget. De Blasio doesn't have a number yet, but insists it won't be $1 billion.
While doing that, we will only do it in a way that we are certain continues to ensure that this city will be safe.
In Albany this week, the Democrat-led legislature is being expected to pass a slew of bills that address police practices. One hot-button measure would end secrecy surrounding the discipline records of cops. It's known as 50A, and abolishing it is something else that protesters are demanding. In Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Emily Druby, Currents News.
With the mayor looking to cut the police budget, the NYPD is confronting a crime wave. Murders and shootings in the Big Apple skyrocketed last week compared to a year ago. There were 13 killings versus 5 in the same time period of 2019. The cops reported 40 shootings, the most in a week since 2015 and up from 24 a year ago. The increase in violence came as demonstrators marched city streets to protest the police killing of George Floyd. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, a majority of city council members have already signed a pledge to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. While the mayor is not on board with the plan, community activists are rallying around it.
We are here today to begin the process of ending the Minneapolis Police Department.
9 of 13 Minneapolis City Council members have publicized their desire to not reform the police department, but abolish it.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it.
A rally at a Minneapolis park served as an incubator of sorts to share ideas about a post-police world, redirecting the department's budget toward youth programs, mental health services, and addiction treatment was part of it. So was having a choice about who to call for help, maybe neighbors or social workers.
Police are not the right response for a myriad of issues: mental health crises, domestic violence calls, opioid overdoses.
Mayor Jacob Frey says he'll work with the police chief on community-led public safety strategies to address systemic racism in police culture, but he doesn't support the police department's abolition. Council member Philippe Cunningham is looking toward revising the city budget this month due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So there is an opportunity for us to be able to explore what our next steps, but really we're going to be hitting 2021's budget very hard.
However, dismantling the police department may or may not happen. Many people in this crowd say they've lost hope with reform.
Body cameras and a black chief. But we are still here, watching black people get murdered and tear gassed in our streets.
We have never looked to the police for our safety. We have looked to each other.
The Minneapolis City Council president admits defunding the police department wouldn't happen immediately. She says it would take years before police would not be necessary. And this morning, Lisa Bender was asked what a family should do in the middle of the night if an intruder invades their home and there's no police department to call.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
Bender and the majority on the city council are insisting that a different approach to policing is best for Minneapolis.
Go home, Jacob! Go home! Go home, Jacob! Go home!
Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, getting yelled at and told to go home. Protesters had encircled his home Saturday, demanding he tell them if he would abolish the city's police force. When he came out and said no, there was an eruption of boos and chants for him to go home. Later, Frey told reporters he's in favor of reforming the police department, but not dismantling it. President Trump is tweeting his support for law and order and not for the defunding and abolition of the police. His message this morning: the radical left Democrats have gone crazy. And the president is considering an address to the nation this week about race and national unity. HUD Secretary Ben Carson is hinting that such a speech could be in the works. New federal laws on police are getting a big push from Democrats on Capitol Hill.
True justice can only be achieved with full, comprehensive action. That's what we are doing today. This is a first step. There is more to come.
Before she spoke about the legislation, Speaker Pelosi led a silent demonstration in the Capitol. House and Senate Democrats knelt for nearly 9 minutes in Emancipation Hall, marking the amount of time an ex-cop had his knee pressed against George Floyd's neck. The leader of the Diocese of Brooklyn, Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio, delivered a powerful Sunday homily on the evil of racism.
Racism is a learned behavior. People are not born racist. Yes, it's picked up by attitudes and feelings and words. Only when we find the love of God and bring that love to others will things change. For the salvation of our nation and the salvation of mankind, we must follow another way. This does not mean that we abandon our righteous efforts, but we shall not, in the process, relinquish our privilege and obligation to love. This is the only way to create beloved communities.
Bishop DiMarzio established the Commission on Racism and Social Justice in the Brooklyn Diocese 2 years ago. One result from the panel's work: Catholic school teachers are teaching lessons to prevent the seeds of racism from growing. And stay with us. Father Brian Massingale is here. The Fordham University ethics expert will look at moving society forward and overcoming racial tensions. That's still ahead in this newscast. Late today, the ex-cop charged with murdering George Floyd had his bail set at more than $1 million. Derek Chauvin pressed his knee across Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes while arresting him exactly 2 weeks ago today. Appearing via a video link with court today, Chauvin heard a Minneapolis judge set his bail at $1.25 million. 3 other ex-cops are in jail facing lesser charges. They're due in court on June 29th. And the people of Houston are saying goodbye to George Floyd, the hearse carrying his body arriving this morning at Fountain of Praise Church. Men, women, families, and children all on hand for a public memorial to Floyd, who was raised in the city. No more than 500 people at a time are allowed inside the church, and all are required to wear masks. Following his funeral tomorrow, Floyd will be laid to rest at the Houston Memorial Garden. There's a lot more news headed your way. Prayer as a form of protest, why vigils are sweeping the nation. Plus, a big shakeup at the New York Times, what led to the resignation of an editor and other changes at the paper. And it's phase 1 in the Big Apple, why the city that never sleeps is slowly waking up. Stay with us.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
Instead of protests, some are coming together in prayer to deal with the unrest across the country. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has more on the importance of vigils at a time like this.
The people united will never be divided.
The death of George Floyd struck a chord within the hearts of millions around the world.
No justice, no peace.
Amidst the ongoing protests, this weekend dozens of vigils were held in cities across the U.S., demonstrating the power of prayer.
There's a window, and we need to take advantage of that to make sure that the killings that happen, just like Mr. Floyd, they never happen again.
The vigils celebrating the lives of Floyd along with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. Taylor was killed by police in March after plainclothes officers entered her apartment on a no-knock warrant.
Say her name.
Friday would have been Breonna's 27th birthday. A common theme throughout the vigils was a moment of silence lasting 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The time ex-cop Derek Chauvin's knee was on George Floyd's neck during his arrest. Laki Dewanyan participated in a moment of silence in Minneapolis.
We are George Floyd. We are taking on that moment with him.
Open our ears to hear the cries of those wounded by racial discrimination.
Currents News parent company DeSales Media also held a vigil this weekend, led by Father John Gribowich.
This is clearly, I think, a verse of hope right now, because we can see the great power of this man's horrible death and how it's transforming essentially the world.
Father, why in this case is a moment of silence so important?
If we're able to just understand what that time means, it's a way for us to be in better communion with that individual death of a man, and also hopefully allow us to then be motivated to be people of action.
Unlike protests or marches, vigils allow participants to heal in a unique way by coming together in prayer.
When an injustice is done to one member of the body, for the rest of the body to run to healing.
George Floyd will be buried next to his mother on Tuesday. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The protests around the country over the tragic death of George Floyd have started a conversation about race in our society. Besides talking about the injustices facing Black people every day, it has also brought up the topic of white privilege. Here to talk more about that is Father Brian Massingale, a professor of theological and social ethics at Fordham University. So, Father, what have we learned about white privilege and how it has shaped our society?
I think this is a very useful conversation to be having this conversation. Basically, white privilege refers to those everyday kinds of benefits and advantages that society gives to people who are white that are denied to those who are African American or persons of color. Another way I put it is to say that we have a society that's set up so that being white is an advantage. It makes life easier. Now, when I say that, I hear a lot of white Catholics object to the fact, well, I work hard for a living. And yes, of course they do. But it means that even with their hard work, they never have to contend with the benefits, with the disadvantages and the stigmas that are attached to dark skin color in this country. That's what we mean by white privilege as a shorthand way of referring to the unequal playing field that our society has because of its racial prejudices.
Right, so it's really about understanding. So what can white people do to help stand against racial inequality?
Well, there are many things that white people can do to stand against racial inequality. One is to be honest about the fact that we're living in an unjust society. And in that unjust society, not everyone experiences life the same way. And because we live in an unjust society, our faith calls us to do what we can to change that unjust society. And to realize that like the biggest thing that Catholics have to do is to understand we're talking about social issues, that these aren't just political issues, these are issues of faith. What we Catholics are called to is to see that being anti-racist is being pro-life. And just as we are a Catholic Church that is known for our commitment to anti-abortion and for our commitment to the defense of religious liberty, we also need to be a church that's known for our commitment to being anti-racist, because that's part of our mission, our identity of being a church committed to the defense of life.
There have been protests after Eric Garner's death, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. Do you think the protests going on now will lead to changes in our society and in police departments?
I hope so. I hope so. As you said, we've been here before, sadly. And I would hope that the kind of outrage that we're seeing, the concern that we're seeing, the fact that this is a movement that's not just here in New York, but across the country and indeed the world, that this is an issue that has claimed the attention of the church at its highest levels. That gives me some cautious hope that this could be something that's different. But I guess my deepest hope is grounded in the presence of the Holy Spirit. That I think when we look at these protests, we need to see them as sacred acts. That what they're doing is they're calling us to, as Catholics, to realize that we uphold the dignity, the sacred worth of every human life. And so when Catholics hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, what they should really be hearing is Black lives are sacred. And when Black lives are held as sacred, then we'll be a society where all life will be sacred.
All right, Father Brian Massingale of Fordham University, thanks so much for sharing your time and your thoughts with us.
It was a pleasure, Christine. Blessings on your ministry.
Protesters in Richmond, Virginia, ripped down a statue of a Confederate Civil War general. The monument had been dedicated to William Carter Wickham. It stood outside Virginia Commonwealth University's main campus for almost 130 years until it was pulled from its base Saturday night. Not far away, the statue of General Robert E. Lee is scheduled to be removed on the orders of Virginia's governor. A big shakeup at the New York Times in the wake of a controversial opinion piece published after George Floyd's death. James Bennett had been in charge of the Times editorial page until Sunday when he quit the paper. The article causing the uproar was written by Republican Senator Tom Cotton, arguing for the use of troops to put down unrest. Bennett originally defended the op-ed, but later flip-flopped and criticized the piece after an outcry from Times staffers. St. John's University journalism expert Mike Rizzo will be here tomorrow. The op-ed incident is raising a lot of questions about publishing standards, and Mike will have some answers. He joins us on Currents News tomorrow. New York City is declaring victory over the coronavirus pandemic. Today, the city that never sleeps started getting back to business. Hundreds of thousands of workers are getting the green light to return to their jobs, construction, manufacturing, and some parts of the retail industry opening up. This is the first phase of ending the lockdown of the Big Apple. Phase 2 could begin in a couple of weeks. Also coming back, the world-famous Colosseum in Rome. At the beginning, the icon will limit the number of visitors to 650 each day. Italy is hoping the move will eventually boost tourism, which was crippled during a nearly 3-month lockdown in the country. But for now, only Romans are allowed inside, and they're thrilled to have the Eternal City to themselves.
We weren't expecting so much excitement. We're excited. Finally, after all this time, we can see our city again. It's another step toward normality, so we're happy.
Right now, only small groups will be permitted into the Colosseum, and everyone needs to have their temperatures checked first. An important day in Paris and the rebuilding of Notre Cathedral. For the first time since fire toppled the landmark spire and devastated the church more than a year ago, workers are finally starting the complicated task of untangling the roof's dangerous scaffolding. 2 teams of 5 workers will take turns being lowered into the roof, where they will work on cutting the 200 tons of scaffolding. Still to come on Currents News, a gentle giant. That's how former co-workers at the Salvation Army remember George Floyd. We'll hear from them. Also ahead, a meaningful moment. What led to this touching scene between a police officer and a 5-year-old at a protest? Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. George Floyd volunteered time at Minneapolis' Salvation Army, helping keep everyone safe. Colleagues say he was a gentle giant who had a giving spirit. Kate Raditz reports from Minneapolis.
So you're going to get your temperature checked.
Staff and guests of the Salvation Army's Harbor Light Center in Minneapolis made their way to 38th in Chicago Sunday night to see the growing memorial for George Floyd for the first time. Floyd was a part of this community.
You can tell about the 2 vans of people we are taking out there, how much love they have for him. People have missed their meals just to be able to come on this trip.
Bishop Smith met Floyd in 2017 when Floyd worked security for the Salvation Army, but colleagues say he often went above and beyond.
He helped us feed the homeless on these streets, so it means a lot. He stood guard over us as we fed the homeless here on countless occasions.
A spokesperson for the Salvation Army of Minnesota says Floyd often walked staff to their cars after their shifts to make sure they got home safely. Floyd would still visit with staff and guests even after he stopped working at the Harbor Light Center. The 6'6", 46-year-old was known as a gentle giant.
He felt a sense of giving back to the community by the time that he spent with people who didn't have places to stay.
After Floyd's death, the Salvation Army released a statement saying in part, Mr. Floyd was a former Salvation Army employee in Minneapolis, and the nature of his death is shocking to all of us who believe in a just, lawful, and equal society.
That was Kate Raditz reporting. The Salvation Army also said they support the peaceful protests over George's death. Finally tonight, a viral video providing a lesson in compassion. During a protest in Houston, a 5-year-old girl who was with her parents became emotional. She approached a police officer and asked him if he was going to shoot them. The little girl's father said the cop got down on one knee, wrapped his arm around his daughter, and told her he was there to protect her. Dad says it was a moment of compassion and empathy that touched his heart.
So I think that's where it's going to start, us being compassionate on both sides. And right now, I think the world is relearning equality. And I think that that's a beautiful, this moment here and the moment that we captured on that video is a beautiful start.
And he said he's thankful that the police officer gave him a different perspective on things. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.